All right, let's talk about a few of these. There's this new SARS-like thing coming in from China, and they're freaking out. And San Francisco is going to test people from the area of China where this new disease is. So it's a thing to know. I know when you leave China, you have to go through a sensor that sees if you have a fever. You just walk past something, an infrared thing scans you. I've done that every time we go to China. So I guess they'll do something like that. And that'd be interesting. See what they do in San Francisco. Anyway. So this is a really big issue. There are not very many different kinds of antibiotics. There are really only 3 or 4 major families. And once a microorganism has evolved resistance to one, it's typically resistant to that entire strain. And there are now several diseases where there is no longer any antibiotic that will effectively fight them. They're very concerned about this. And the argument of the World Health Organization is that they need government support to develop new antibiotics because the market pressure, they're too expensive to develop or something. The free market will not lead to development of new categories. And we desperately need new categories because more and more, because people use antibiotics far too much, then they encourage the microorganisms to evolve resistance to them. And it is one of the big impending health problems. So here's Marco Rubio, who a Republican senator. I think he was a candidate for president a few times. This is a big argument. I mean, I started going to DEF CON China a couple of years ago when they started it, and I found out what my students had told me. Daily life is exactly the same in China as here. If you read American newspapers, they make it sound horrible over there, like the government is terrible, and it doesn't seem to be significantly worse than ours, especially lately. But anyway, so he has his argument about China's investment. One thing that is absolutely true about China is they are totally stealing our stuff and lying about it. But they also announced it openly. I mean, it seems to me like it's logical. From their point of view, they're a communist nation. They do not understand why someone should be able to invent important new technology and then patent it and then not let you have it. They just steal it, make it available. But it is totally a violation of American law, and we're constantly mad about it, but the market is so big we can't find much to do about it. Yeah.
There used to be a patent paralegal, and so the whole intellectual property concept is kind of just completely foreign to them.
I know. And this is like people used to say when I was a kid, they said the American Indians don't understand land ownership. So when you buy the land, this makes no sense to them. You're giving them money for something you can't possibly buy. And they have a similar attitude. What is this? And, you know, I'm not terribly fond of our recording industry restrictions and our patent restrictions here. I understand it's our system. But anyway, China totally doesn't respect it. That's the main area they do. And from a technical point of view, it shows how bad our defenses are because China just hacks everybody and you can put up all the firewalls and everything you like and they just blast right through it, which is why we're upping our defenses to stop them. So anyway, many people, it seems like there are a lot of people in America that really want us to be angry at China and want to apparently start a war with China. I don't know why. I don't think China wants to fight with us. They want to get along with us. However, anyway, we'll see what happens. So this is interesting. You know, China has the first guy that cloned human babies because they have a more open society. You can get away more over there. So you can do crazy things that nobody could possibly do over here because of legal restrictions. And here's another one. This is something that the major companies, I think Google said they could do and they decided not to do, which is make a really efficient image search engine. And this company has now done it, and they've delivered it to 600 law enforcement agencies in America quietly, and they can take any picture of anybody and immediately find out who they are. And, you know, this is one of those interesting issues. A lot of people say this is too dangerous. The lawsuits will be too bad. It'll help people stalk people. It'll end all privacy. But another attitude is it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And you might as well be the guy making money off it, which is what this guy said. But anyway, it has happened, and it's already going on. And now I think San Francisco banned, some American states, I think, banned facial recognition. They're trying to make a national ban for 5 years, but that hasn't passed yet. A lot of people are beginning to think we really want to, this is really not good, and we should have a law against it. But I think they're trying to close the barn door after the horse is out. Anyway, so Facebook has been arguing that they do not need to tell people what they do with their data, which is an interesting position. But they pay for a lot of expensive lawyers, but they appear to be losing this. They've now been ordered to hand over the data. One of the states wants to know what you did with the data because of Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica, there's a wonderful book called Mindfuck by Peter Wiley, who was their database engineer. And I used to be a database engineer. It's a very good place to find out what's really going on at a company. And he developed this tool to combat online extremism. They tried to find out the psychology that makes people watch videos and then become violent and crazy. And he worked for the UN and other groups, finding ways to detect that and ways to reverse it. So people would stop being extreme. And then Bannon came in and took over the company and used it for the opposite purpose, to take normal people and make them into raging, angry lunatics. And the database engineer he concealed this from people in the company for a while. It took him a while to figure out that his tool was being used for the opposite of what he designed it for. But it was effective, and it brought us Trump and Brexit. I wondered how it is that the United States and Britain did exactly the same crazy thing at the same time. They were both done by Steve Bannon. He deliberately pushed both of those things and used online tools to make them happen. And anyway, I think it's very interesting because when I was a kid, I read a lot of science fiction, like most technology people. And one of the big ones was Foundation. And Foundation and Empire is a series of 3 books by Isaac Asimov. And his postulate is what happens when psychology and political science and sociology really become strong sciences like physics. And you can actually control society. And he said, then you can make a glorious empire and solve all the problems like poverty and everything you don't like. You could really fix them. Whereas right now we sort of try to solve them. We usually end up just making it worse because we don't really know how to get people to stop doing stupid things. But you could if you were really good at propaganda. And of course, it could be used for good or evil. But anyway, it does appear that we're very close to having manipulation techniques that can really be used effectively on people, far more than the old-fashioned technique of just putting up propaganda and hoping people are dumb enough not to question it. So anyway, the National Archive wanted to put up a picture of the Women's March, but a bunch of the women are marching with political signs against Trump, and so they blurred out the statements criticizing Trump and then put it up as like a promotional poster. And then everybody freaked out and say, you are supposed to be real historical record. You can't be altering stuff. And there was a huge scream, and they apologized and undid it because of the Twitter storm. So they've now apologized. This is their official Twitter feed. They have apologized. They say they're going to take down the poster and replace it with a real poster that hasn't grayed out the offensive parts of them. And well, so it's kind of nice to see that. You haven't seen much of that. I know when Trump got in, a lot of people freaked out because they started erasing the weather data so they could deny global warming, and they started erasing the statistics on demographics so they could deny discrimination. And a whole group of technical people started exporting our government statistics to Canada to try to protect it from the US government erasing it, because he really had, he liked the Internet Archive, but outside the United States, because the Internet Archive, yeah, and that was the idea, because it turned out not to be quite as bad as everyone thought, but certainly they did remove, they removed a lot of evidence from weather data, a lot of terms, you know, it's, once you have a really strong government that wants to replace the truth with propaganda and wants to rewrite history and rewrite science, then, you know, it's...
Well, a digitized government makes you much more vulnerable.
Yes. Well, it also, it gives you new defenses like this. So anyway, that's where we're at, and people are worrying about it. There's another fun book I got called This Is Not Propaganda, written by a Russian, explaining that Putin started this, where you do not just have the old-fashioned propaganda where you tell people a lie about somebody to get them to hate them. Instead, you tell them so many lies contradicting yourself until they no longer believe there is such a thing as truth. Putin started this, and Trump certainly moved this way. And they've done surveys, and they've shown that modern Republicans typically do not even agree there is such a thing as truth. And you could see it in the online stuff with all the crazy conspiracy theories. And this is why Sarah Sanders thought she could just say, well, those are just alternative facts, because they really don't believe in this thing called facts anymore. They don't trust experts. They don't trust studies or knowledge. They think that everything is just a matter of opinion. And it's a new way of controlling people. Anyway.
Isn't that called psychological operations?
Yes, these are all psyops of various kinds, but this is a new kind of psyops where you annihilate truth. The old kind was just to get you to do something they want. Like I remember when we had the first Iraq war, and I think it was either Iraq or Iran we went into, and they were trying to convince the citizens there that the United States was not there to just take the oil, but we're actually there to bring a better government and benefit the people. And the CIA reporters said, we're having great difficulty selling this message. We are hampered by the fact that it is obviously false. And everybody knows it's false. And we can't convince people of this because they immediately know we're lying. And this is a problem for old-fashioned propaganda. You can't sell something if everybody can plainly see it's false. But Trump can. and Putin can, because they use a different technique where they can sell you something that everybody can see as false. They just gradually erode your concept of truth and falsehood until you find loyalty to a team to be more valuable. This also explains something I've often wondered about, which is cult groups and religions who claim something utterly false. And if you claim to believe that, you're now trapped in the group and you have to hate everybody else and you have to shout it louder and louder to show that you're in the group. There is something very powerful about a big lie. And anyway, it's possible to get all upset and think things shouldn't be this way, but I highly recommend getting over that. I mean, this is social engineering. The fact is, it is just a system, and I recommend analyzing it scientifically and finding out what you can do with it. Is more productive than saying it shouldn't be this way. This is the way people really are. We are herd animals, and our desire to blend into the herd is a strong part of our psychology, and you can get people to do things which are wrong in many ways by convincing them they have to do it to be in the herd. Because animals have learned that it's better to stay in the flock, and you just follow the leader and don't argue about things, but just stay in the middle of the herd. There's a strong instinct for that, and I think, we just have to accept it the way it is and then learn how to achieve your goals in such a system. Anyway, so Teslas go a lot further than other cars because their batteries are quite different. And what they do is they use batteries that will wear out faster and then have a higher risk of fire. But their cars do go much faster. And Tesla is famous for this. Facebook's motto is move fast and break things. And Tesla takes much bigger risks and has gigantic accomplishments. They do things that other people are afraid to do. Anyway, so we'll see how it works. I haven't heard much trouble with the batteries. I have heard they keep plowing into stationary objects at high speeds. The Tesla's automatic driver has difficulty telling a crosswalk from a stationary tree or car, and they plow right into it. Happened 3 or 4 times. This seems to me like a pretty serious defect. It just plows right into stationary objects. But they don't seem to be getting too upset about it. Anyway, all right, I guess I got another minute or so. Let's see. This one was pretty exciting. There was in a lot of states in America, they're using terrible systems and they just are defensive and lying about it. And so in Georgia, they're using paperless electronic systems that are vulnerable, running old versions of junk, not logging things. And when they got a Freedom of Information Act or some other court order saying we had to examine your server, they immediately tried to delete everything. So there would be no evidence. But the FBI managed to get an image of it, and they were able to analyze that image, and they totally found evidence that they had been hacked and that someone had altered things and then covered their tracks imperfectly. And this is all the voting machine cybersecurity experts say we should go back to paper. And then you can just count the pieces of paper to check the vote, and no electronic system is secure enough to be trusted without a paper backup. But several states, there was a huge effort because of the hanging chads, which was what, the 2000 election or 2004, when the paper ballots had a defect, it was hard to count them, and this affected who was going to win. To fix that problem, they paid and encouraged electronic voting and deployed it all at a massive cost, and a bunch of states paid for these electronic voting. Now they're saying, get rid of electronic voting, go back to paper, and they're like, oh, you guys just shut up, which I can kind of sympathize with, because if we do go back to paper, we're going to have another problem. Anyway, it's tough. All right, so I think we're up to the official time here. So let's just start talking about this class. All right, there's supposedly a lot of students in this class, not too many in the room and a few of them online, but anyway, they may appear or just vanish. We'll see what happens, but this is exploit development. So the point of this class is, this is probably my most difficult class. It's certainly the most difficult one I'm teaching this semester. So if you're new to cybersecurity and jumping right into this, it's probably not a good move. You should take 120 and 123 first at least. And a lot of students say it would be good to take an assembly language class first before they take this one. Now we're going to do a little bit of programming, a little bit of assembly language. We're not doing a lot. You certainly don't need to know a whole class full of it, but you can't totally freak out and panic when you see some assembly code. Yeah. Well, I'm going to avoid using VMs. I got rid of them. Now I'm using cloud servers for everything, which are because modern laptops cannot run virtual machine software very well, especially modern Windows laptops. About half the people are using machines that will no longer run VMware Fusion or VMware Workstation very well. And so I taught this class at Black Hat, and those guys are paying like $4,000 each to take the class, and it's not okay for them to have a miserable experience. So I ported everything to the cloud, and it worked just fine. So I'm a real addict of the cloud, which is why everything is in the cloud. If you go to a website or anything, everybody is not running their own hardware. Almost nobody does that. It's all running on Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud or somebody. It is far better to just rent a little tiny piece of somebody else's server than to put up your own rack with servers and backups and everything. It's of course riskier because you don't even control the stuff and all the data goes over the internet, but if you're willing to accept a lower level of security, it's much more functional. Of course, now the entire US military is moving to Azure with the JEDI project, which is such a big contract, it'll make Azure #1, but Jeff Bezos is suing to stop that, claiming that this was an intervention by Trump to bias the military's actions because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post and Trump hates his guts, of course. And he would rather send the money to Azure. I don't know if he'll win. I have no inside knowledge about whether he really did intervene. I do know that the Army is very, very fond of Windows. And I would expect them logically to go to Azure for that reason. But anyway, they are supposedly going to Azure, which will be, in my opinion, an incredible disaster. I've used Azure for years and it is garbage. Oh my God. There is no excuse for Azure. It is so not ready for prime time. What's that?
I mean, you're kind of a security expert. So.
Well, it just doesn't even work. For example, they ran out of server capacity about a month ago, so the stuff all stopped working. They said, oh, we're building more servers. I'm like, wait a minute, you just let it run out of stuff. What is this? And we were doing a contest on Azure, and we had a domain controller, and when students set it up, and then that student showed up late the next morning, he didn't know the password, and you can't reset the password. There's like 3 official password reset processes, and they don't work. We spent 4 hours, and the whole team of us, and none of us could figure out how to reset the password. Kirk spent 2 weeks, and he finally figured out a way to reset the password. There's only like 2 days of work. Everybody else just has a button, reset the password. Like, this is the #1 most common tech support problem. You lost a password. If you're using Azure, it's time for ritual suicide if this happens. It's just amazingly messed up. It's like Microsoft at their finest. It's like Vista, only more so. Anyway, however, many companies really use Microsoft and they have highly trained people. So if you want a good job, if you get the Microsoft server certifications and really learn Active Directory and stuff, people will pay you a lot of money because, man, that stuff is hard to use. And they really need an expert, and you really have to work hard to become an expert. I used to be Microsoft certified and do that stuff years ago in the earlier versions until Windows 8 came out, and that's when I said I've had enough of this garbage and went over to Linux. But a lot of companies are still using it, and man, you really need a trained expert running that stuff. And when you put it on Azure, it gets 10 times harder. So if you want a steady job, become an expert on Microsoft Windows and Azure. That is one thing on the competition team. They always need a person that can run the Windows stuff, and everybody's trying to, oh, I don't want to do that. The Windows stuff and the firewall are very essential things and very hard. And that's hard to find experts to do that. A lot of people know how to run Linux servers. Linux servers are much simpler. Anyway, so you've got a textbook here, which is, yeah, that's the right book. This book is pretty old and it's pretty dense, but it's very good. It is the Bible. There are 3 or 4 books that are considered Bibles of this business, or everybody should go into that book, and this is absolutely one of them. Any list of security books, this is in the top 5 or the top 10. We are not going to do everything in this book because some of it is old, but we're going to do modern versions of it. So the point of this is to learn how you can take over servers. So the first question is to find a vulnerability. There are ways to do that, which we'll talk about. Then after you find a vulnerability, typically what you have is an attack that will just crash the server. That's usually what the first attack does. That's a denial of service attack. And that is of some value, but it's not as much value as remote control. It's what you really like. Rather than crashing the server, you'd like to gain the ability to execute commands on the server. So exploit development is the name for the process of taking a denial of service attack and refining it into a remote control attack. That is your goal. Then you can run arbitrary code on the server. And now instead of just smashing something like throwing a brick through the window, you can actually use somebody else's system. Now you can hide malware on it, slowly steal the data, erase the logs like the Chinese do. The Chinese infect you and you will never know what's happened. They were on every American servers. Google found them. They'd been on Google server for years, stealing all their stuff quietly and sneakily. Google finally noticed, why is all this data going to China when we don't have a data center there? And but that's what the pros do. Just like, you know, when another nation's military wants to do espionage on you, they sneak somebody in your company and they do good work and win awards and move up to a high position, and all the time they're leaking your secrets and you don't know it. They do the same thing with malware. I saw a chat message coming in. All right, we can't see the slides. Oh, thank you for telling me. I'm not sharing the desktop. I should be. I'm not showing any slides yet. You should see a desktop. If anybody else remotely can you see the desktop? See it? Yeah, you see it. Good. Yeah, I'll show slides in a minute. I'm just talking about this stuff right now. Good. Good. Okay. I really appreciate you telling me, however, because sometimes I do forget to share the desktop, and it's the only way I can find out is from chat messages from you guys. This broadcast is amateur hour. I should really have a monitor or something, but I don't. So anyway, you don't get points for showing up in class, and physical attendance is not required. You can tune in remotely over Zoom, which is what these people are doing. And you can also watch YouTube videos, which I post after class later if you want to. The only reason to come to class is if you want help or if you want to meet the other students or participate in on-campus events like the cyber competition teams and such. And usually what happens after a few weeks is I have a small studio audience of people that bother to show up and a lot of remote people, which is fine. I like physically showing up for class, but if you don't want to, you don't need to. Anyway, so there is our quizzes. They're in my online Canvas system. You have to click this link to get there. This is from samsclass.info. And it's not the City College Canvas server. I don't use that thing because they would only let official students in, and I let the whole world in because I'm completely crazy. But anyway, but because I also used to use the API, which I got tired of, it was too much hassle. But anyway, I just don't like, I've learned to never use City College resources for any reason because there's a bunch of people in the way and I'd rather have my own stuff. All right, so you can send emails here and it will reach my very efficient grader. Emails sent directly to me often get lost in a pile of junk. I'm pretty disorganized. I have an organized, efficient grader that will check anything related to points, send it to here, and that will make sure a true professional sees it, not me. Anyway, so, all right, so I have an introduction here, and then after this, there's quizzes every week you should do, and there's homework you should do. The homework all consists of hands-on projects where you do something with computers, and then you send in screenshots to show that you did it. So it's all could be done remotely, and many students do. I'll be traveling to conferences several times during the semester, and I'll let you know, so I'll be coming in by Zoom remotely. And usually what I have is a student opens up the room and projects it here, so I can be remote, like the students are remote. And I'll let you know as much as I can when that's happening. All right, and we already got a guest coming. This guy, looks like I fouled up my link to his picture, but this guy is a high school student who has been leaking confidential information from CNN as political activism. He figured out how to guess the URLs for polls at CNN before they officially released them. And he told them, and they don't care, so he can find it out early. He puts it on his blog before CNN actually releases it. And he's a big political activist. Now he's basically a white hat activist of sorts. Anyway, this is called white hatting when you do that sort of thing, or perhaps gray hatting. He thinks it's legal. I think it's probably not legal. That's why I kind of like to get him here so I can talk to him. Because I used to think that kind of thing was legal too, and I found out it wasn't quite as legal as you might think. Anyway, but he's an interesting character, and he agreed to come and give a talk here, so we can find out what he's up to. He's a big Democratic operative too, so I recommend everyone to stay on top of the homework. Oh yes, it's hard. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yes, all my classes have a lot of homework. Don't put it off and think you can catch up. That often doesn't work. So, and like I say, this is the hardest class. My other ones are easier. But this one here has assembly code and binary, which is very exciting. But at first, people have an allergic reaction to a page full of hexadecimal codes and assembly language. At first, it looks impossible. It's not that bad if you get into it. But it's like a page of math. You just say, oh, my God, what is that garbage? And you have to go through it step by step, and then it's not so bad. And there's a page about grading. I've got it on paper if anybody wants it on paper. It's usually not very popular, but you've got a paper handout if you want it. Everything's at samsclass.info. And as far as the grading goes, all that matters is quizzes and the final exam that are all online in Canvas, and your homework. Adds up to a bunch of points, 90% an A, 80% a B. There's a lot of extra credit homework. If you do the extra projects, you often do not have to take the final at all because you have enough points by then. And if you find other things to do, like off-campus training events, DEF CON, RSA, those are all worth extra credit. Let me know when you go to those things. RSA is coming up in about a month. I don't have any source of official free tickets, but I think with a student ID, there's usually student day you can go to for free. And if you Google for like free RSA tickets a couple weeks before the con, there are often vendors giving passes and stuff. So there are often ways to get in. I wouldn't pay for it, but you might go if you can get in for free. Anyway, I taught hands-on classes there a couple times, but I'm not doing it this year. They never really got their act together too well with the hands-on classes, so students didn't have a very good experience. Anyway, So let's talk about the first chapter here. So this is the first chapter of the book, and this is what he regards as review of material he hopes you already know, and I think a lot of people didn't already know it. I didn't really. So here's the basic concepts, and let me see if I can get this Zoom thing to go away. Let's see what this is. Well, B-side, yeah, B-sides counts for credit. Yeah, absolutely, and I highly recommend B-sides more than RSA. I'll be at B-sides. I'm doing a workshop there, and yeah, B-sides is more fun than RSA in my opinion. RSA is the executives and salespeople, and B-sides is all the technical people. So I have more fun there as sort of the hands-on technical type person. So vulnerability is when you have the ability to do something to a computer that the computer developer did not want you to do. Something you're not supposed to be able to do, like an administrative act without really logging in as administrator first, that sort of thing. So exploit is something that takes advantage of the vulnerability, and you often call it a proof of concept. If you are a good guy and not a criminal, then you are doing research to find vulnerabilities, and when you're done, you want to prove that you really found one, so you write proof of concept code that does something not too destructive, like make an extra file on the server or something relatively harmless to prove that I really got in. And that's usually what you do if you're going to like submit it to a client who's paying you for a pen test, or to someone who are reporting the vulnerability. You have a proof of concept to prove that in fact you have a problem, that it's not something that really does a lot of harm. There are some people that say you should not be publishing proofs of concept because bad guys often take them and modify them to make real malware. But most of the security research community has said this is stupid. We have to really publish proofs of concept. It's the only way to really learn about things. And you have to accept as acceptable collateral damage that some of them will be used by bad guys to do real harm. Instead, what most people have settled on, there's no law about this, but what most people have settled on, and what I do, is the so-called responsible disclosure process, where I tell the vendor privately first, and then you wait a period of time, like 30 or 90 days, and then if they ignore you, then you go public. This way, they have a chance to fix it, and if they don't fix it, you shame them by going public, and then they're motivated to fix it that way. This is what most people do. There are people who keep it secret forever. There are people who just dump it publicly right away, but the most common compromise is the one I described. That's what I do. I give them 30 days, and then they become homework. Anyway, 0 day is an exploit that does something new that nobody knows about, and therefore nobody can defend themselves because they don't even know it's a problem. They can't put it in their antivirus engine or in their firewall or anything. So these are the most valuable things. If you have, for example, a 0 day that will take over an iPhone, it's worth $2 million right now on the black market. And you can sell it through exploit brokers. There are 5 or 6 of them. And mostly they sell, I understand, to the NSA, who has the most money and is the best bigger buyer, but it could be selling to other military or cybercrime gangs in principle, but in practice, from what I hear, the NSA is the highest bidder. However, there are people that say this is terrible and they're rotten people and how dare they sell these things. They're basically the same thing as arms dealers. They're selling dangerous things to people, and people argue about the ethics of it, but it is apparently legal. Nobody's gone to jail for selling these things. There are consequences. Right now, the NSA is in the doghouse because they developed a secret attack into Windows, and one of their contractors put that stuff on a laptop with Kaspersky antivirus, and Kaspersky antivirus sent it back to Moscow, and they gave it to the Russian military, and the Russian military pretended to be Ukrainian individuals and leaked it on the internet to embarrass the NSA and affect the last election in favor of Trump. And they did. And then they released a virus to shut down hospitals called WannaCry, and it did shut down hospitals in the UK and kill people, and it would have done that here except for the actions of one man, Marcus Hutchins, that happened to turn it off before the time zone shifted. But it created a worldwide disaster, hundreds of millions of dollars of damage, and human lives lost, and fundamentally the attack came from the NSA. So that was bad PR for them. They are blamed by a lot of people for creating this situation. So the NSA has taken to releasing exploits. They released a couple this week to get passed by Microsoft, and they've released hacking tools. We're going to use some like Ghidra. They've suddenly tried to become a good guy in the world of cybersecurity to buff up their image. Anyway.
Didn't Hutchins get prosecuted for that?
No, and I don't think it's illegal at all. I mean, I've asked my lawyer about this, and he's told me, for example, in America, if I find a vulnerability and I just dump it publicly, like on Twitter, he said, free speech covers you as long as there is some good in what you say. You're allowed to say anything in America unless it is totally malicious. The Supreme Court's example is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater when there's not a fire. And so if I say, I found a vulnerability and all the people using this product should quit and buy a different product, there's a good side to that. some people should know. It's like public awareness. There's also a bad side. Now all the criminals can attack people that don't, but you're allowed to say something that are part good and part bad. And certainly I would say the NSA's mission is to hack into everybody's stuff and steal their secret. That is their real mission. And in order to do that, they have to develop weapons and they have to keep them secret. So it's not illegal or even immoral what they're doing, but since they failed to keep it secret and let the Russians steal it, they did create blowback. You know, the military term, they have unintended bad consequences. And now there are political consequences. Once they become the world's bad guy, now it's hard for them to get funding. So but it's not like they broke a law and they go to jail. It's like they have had a problem which causes political problems. So now what they have to do, in my opinion, I do not have any inside knowledge, I don't have a security clearance, but in my opinion, what they have to do is develop lethal weapons and take a few, like probably the ones that somebody else already knows about, and dump them out publicly to try to puff up their image. But they probably aren't really releasing the powerful stuff because that would compromise their primary mission. But you know, it's a complicated world with a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people arguing on many sides here. I see a chat message coming in. They did break the law. Well, you think, I don't know if the NSA broke the law by developing these or by letting the Russians steal them. The Constitution protects the government from spying on us. Well, yeah, you can argue that. You can argue that they used these to spy on American citizens, but I don't think you could prove that. But yes, there are people trying to do that. Yeah, that's certainly, yeah, well, yeah, okay. This is a very interesting issue. And I've seen a lot of people argue on both sides. How they use these exploits could get them in trouble. Developing them is certainly not a crime. If they use them to spy on American citizens, that might be a crime. That might violate the Fourth Amendment. So it could be, but these things are complicated. And I had the guy from the Department of Justice here last semester talk to us. If you have any more leads for people high in law and government, anything to talk about this, or activists, I'd like to have them talk. These are really important issues to talk about, and I'd like to hear more voices on one side or the other. It's not so simple as they're breaking the law and it's wrong. It's much more complicated than that. Related to another very big issue, which is the FBI would like to see what's on cell phones when they have a search warrant. And they used to be able to do that. Until 5 years ago, you would just send a cell phone to Apple with a $300 fee and a search warrant, and they would take the data off it and give it to you. Everybody has a backdoor into their own products. For tech support, what happens if you lose your password? You go to the manufacturer and they have a secret way in. That's the way everything was until about 5 years ago. Now, Apple has locked themselves out of their own stuff, and the FBI is not happy with that. And it appears to be legal for the Apple to do that in America because the FBI has not been able to pass a law requiring you to have a wiretap provision for smartphones, although they do have that for the other kind of phone, the old-fashioned phone. You're not allowed to sell a phone service that has no way for a government wiretap. And the government does not see why that's true for smartphones. You can sell a phone, but there's no way to put in a wiretap. Right now, that's where we are, but at any time that could change. But it's a lot of people are really angry on one side of this issue, and I think that is pretty foolish. There are two real stakeholders here that do make some sense. There are times when the government really has to perform a legal search with a search warrant, and making it absolutely impossible for them to do that is a very strange position to take, although as far as I can tell, 95% of the security community says we should lock the government out of everything and that'll be just fine, which is a very curious position to take, in my opinion. But anyway, that's why they regard me as a right-wing fascist in the security community. Memory management is what we're going to exploit primarily here. This is mostly how you do it. There is a fundamental weakness in all computers, which is that every file looks the same. If I take some letters and type it in a notepad, it saves them as a bunch of bytes. If I have an executable file, it's just a bunch of bytes. If I have an image, a movie, a sound, it's all just a bunch of bytes. And the computer doesn't know what it is. So all the attacks we're going to do involve putting in data that is supposed to be one kind of data, like a password, and having it misinterpreted as something like a program and executed. That's the fundamental flaw they all have. There's a very recent article I saw about 3 months ago of a defense, which the first thing I thought, why don't we have 12 bits in a byte, and the first 4 bits specify what this byte is? There's in fact a system coming out that does that. Something that actually labels every file with what it is in a fundamental way, so you will know this is text, it cannot be executed. This is executable text, can't be printed, that sort of thing. This is not in any of the popular operating systems yet, but this is in fact a proposal. If you would do that, this sort of attack would not work. But all the attacks we're going to do involve a computer getting confused about how to use data and taking data that came in under one purpose and reusing the same data in an unexpected way. And these are called memory corruption attacks, where you are able to put something in memory where the computer operating system did not expect it to go. Yeah.
What is that tagging system called?
I forget. It's not even out in a commercial product yet. There's just a proposal. Yeah. The very rudimentary form of it is in modern operating systems in that they have permissions on memory segments now. And it's an extension of that. You could have permissions and type on your memory segments. Anyway, that's the problem here. That's the fundamental problem. So when you run a program, it has to have regions of memory. And it has, so here's 3 sections almost every program has. It has a text section, which unfortunately is not readable text. One simple rule about all Microsoft naming is that everything is always named the opposite of what it is. And it's not because they're stupid, it's because of history, I think. But anyway, the text section contains assembly language code. The readable strings are actually in the data section. And then you have the stack section, BSS. We'll talk a lot more about the stack, which is used for temporary storage. And there are often many other segments, but you almost always have these segments in a program. So the stack is a special piece of memory to make it possible to have subroutines. Now, when I started, I wrote Fortran and I wrote spaghetti code where you just had a bunch of code and then you had go to and then go down here and then go to and then go to, and it would just jump around and make a mess. And that's the way amateurs wrote code for a while. And they learned, as you would imagine, that you cannot maintain code like that. You can't add new features and have other developers add to the code. Pretty soon you lose track of that spaghetti code and it's impossible to fix it. So what's much better is to write little subroutines that do one thing and another little subroutine that does one thing and test them until they work. And then your main program just calls a subroutine to do a job and this subroutine to do a job. So you have to have a main program that calls a subroutine, that calls another subroutine and another subroutine, like a dream within a dream. That is the current way it all works. You could do it other ways, but that is how we do it. We do it by having one routine running and then it jumps into another routine and another. And so they developed a stack as a special kind of memory just to make this process work, so that I can be halfway through a program, stop what I'm doing, save the current state, jump into a subroutine and allocate new memory and do something here. And when I'm done, return up here, restore the old state and pick up where I left off. So you're constantly interrupting the flow and launching a sub-process, and you're constantly returning from a sub-process back to where you started and trying to restore its original state. That step of returning turns out to be spectacularly vulnerable. It is fairly easy to trick it into incorrectly restoring its state when it jumps back. So instead of resuming what it was doing, it does something different. And that's how you gain control of the machine, with a buffer overflow. But this is how all modern operating systems work. And now the heap is what you have in just an unstructured way. The heap is just where you can reserve some space, store something, and then you can clear it later. This is what you might do if you process network traffic. You might have something like a web browser or a chat client where someone opens a page, then a bunch of videos and pictures and stuff come down, and you have to store them for a while, but then they go to another page, and now you can just throw that stuff away. So you put that in the heap. It's not organized in this dream within a dream logical structure. It's just something you store, but you don't want to store it forever because you need to clear that room to load the next page. So that's what the heap is for. All right. So here's a diagram showing what program layout looks like, and let me make it a reasonable size so I can point to things. All right. So you've got a heap here, which as you add more chunks, it's growing up. You've got a stack, which grows down. You've got kernel space. The kernel is a very small part of code that has the ability to completely use all parts of the computer. The processor, as a security measure, takes dangerous instructions and forbids them for use by userland code. Only the kernel can use them, and typically only your operating system developer is allowed to write kernel code. So that's the only code that directly touches the hardware. So if I want to put something out on the screen, for example, draw something on the screen, I cannot do it. All I can do is ask a Microsoft or an Apple routine to please put it on the screen for me. I call one of their kernel functions and that puts it on the screen. I'm not authorized to directly send data to the screen. That's how computers work. Anyway, and then you got the stack segment down here and a data segment and text segment sitting here. These are the instructions that are being processed, and these are the data used by it. And then for temporary storage, you've got a stack, which is handling this subroutine, calling a subroutine, calling a subroutine, and returning from that. And you got the heap for all the other temporary storage of chunks that you might want to use and then clear out when you're done using them. And both the stack and the heap have multiple chunks of data for different purposes stored next to each other. And in both cases, you can easily have an overflow vulnerability where you accidentally go beyond the limit and write to a chunk that has a different purpose. And that's, remember, that's the most common type of memory corruption attack where you take over the machine by doing things you should not be allowed to do on the stack or the heap. We'll spend most of this class doing those. All right, now I got a few Kahoots. So if you have a computer or a phone or something, you can do this. It's worth extra credit. I've got chapter 1A is here. And that's not the right way. Let's see. CNIT 127. Whoa, whoa, whoa. All right, I'm losing control of my machine here. 127, chapter 1A. There, that might do it. And it's randomized. There, this might do it. Okay. That sounds about right. So you can go to kahoot.it or indeed download the Kahoot app and put in that number, and then you can play. The students who get the 3 highest point scores, they get 3 extra points. It can add up to a lot by the end of the semester. It's all extra credit because this isn't particularly fair or anything, because you could be peeking on the person next to you or something. But it's just hopefully stops people from falling asleep so much. And while that happens, I'm going to make a place to store the winners. There we are. All right, good. All right, we got 14. I'll wait a few more seconds to see if we have more coming. One good thing about this is the remote students can do it too over Zoom. All right. I used to use these hardware things called eye clickers, but they do not let remote students do it. And this turns out to be better. All right, folks are still coming. All right, 5 more seconds. I guess that's it. Okay. So the process of sending random data to a target, what's that? That's fuzzing. This is typically how you find vulnerabilities. You send just a lot of random data until it crashes. And when it does, you've found a denial of service vulnerability. All right. What section of memory is LIFO? Stack, last in, first out, like a stack of trays. The last one you put is the first one to come out, which is appropriate for this dream within a dream subroutine system. All right. What section of memory is read-only? This is text. The code you write is read-only. You are not allowed to write self-modifying code. Now, when I started writing assembler in like the early 1980s, I wrote self-modifying code all the time because I didn't know any better. This turns out to be completely insane because you can't, for example, even write down the program and read it because it changes the instructions while it runs. You can't control it or audit it or maintain it, but it was the easiest way to get anything done back in the way of 8-bit assembler. And so to prevent this, all modern operating systems completely forbid this. Microsoft's rule is write or execute. If it's executable code, you cannot write there. However, as we're going to see, the Raspberry Pi violates this rule for some ungodly reason, and you can totally write self-modifying code on the Pi, and we're going to do that. This is one of the many examples of the Internet of Things. To make all these gadgets, they had to take computer operating systems and make them really small and really low in power consumption. And they did it by taking really old systems and throwing away whatever they didn't need. And they often made appalling mistakes. So the Raspberry Pi, like almost every Internet of Things device, is like shooting fish in a barrel for hackers. They had to miniaturize it, and all they wanted to do was come out as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, and they probably didn't really think about security much at all, and you can easily find spectacular vulnerabilities in them. Anyway, so where are the machine language instructions for the program? Okay, it's in the text section. You'd like to think it would be in the data section. The text section is actually executable instructions. You get used to it. In no way does that word text have anything to do with what it means. It's just there to give you a headache. All right. And what is an attack with no known defense? That's a 0-day, of course, and this is what the NSA is supposed to do. They're supposed to find new attacks and really keep them secret so nobody can stop them and nobody can abuse it. That's the idea. It didn't really work out too well in practice, but that is the idea. All right. So the winners are 4055. They'll have to tell me who they are if they want their points. 4083. Oh, this is disturbing. I think somebody hacked the system. Did I have 4118? No, cheesecake. I see those totals. Oh, okay. Now I'm understanding. Because we want a Chris. Good. Chris and cheesecake. Of course, these still aren't very helpful names. And Uddy. Okay, so if you people want points, you're going to have to come out of the closet and tell me who you are at some point. But anyway, there's often people who have enough points anyway and don't care. Anyway, if you use fake names like that, then don't complain if you don't get your points. Anyway, so, all right. So now we got to talk a little bit about assembly language. The computer actually runs machine code, which is binary. That's all it cares about. Assembly language is a way of writing machine code so it's a little easier for humans to read. It doesn't get that easy, but at least it's a little bit alphabetical. And this depends on your hardware. The most common is 32-bit x86 code. Now people are moving to 64-bit code. That's increasingly more common, but most modern computers can run 32-bit code. So as long as there are some 32-bit machines around, most virus writers would rather write 32-bit code. Now, again, it's the joy of the Internet of Things. Very few laptops are 32 bits anymore, but a lot of those gadgets are 32-bit. 32-bit code will stay with us because those processors are smaller and cheaper, and anyway. So this was the most common. Now 64-bit is coming up. And then there were all these other hardware devices, the most important one being ARM. ARM is big. iPhones are ARM, and I've heard it said servers are going to move to ARM. Most of the Internet Thing devices use ARM processors instead of x86 processors. So I've added a bunch of ARM exploits to this class, and now thanks to Axiom 8, who took this class a few years ago and then wrote the new iPhone attack that completely destroyed iPhone security, the most powerful iPhone exploit ever. He didn't learn how to do that from me, but he just got the idea of attacking things from this class. And because he did that 3 months ago, now we can really hack iPhones, and we're going to do quite a lot of that. It's really fun. iPhones have been a closed door for 8 years, and now they're open, except for the very latest one. And Apple might prosecute. That's why Axiom 8 uses a fake name. But if they wise up, they'll realize they can promote everybody has to buy a new phone. The old phones are garbage. That's not really such a bad thing for Apple, is it? But anyway, that's the way it is. So here's the way it looks. You'll have a command like this: move ECX 0x42. So this takes the move, will move data from one location to another. ECX is the destination, which is the C register, extended C extended, unfortunately, because when it all started, there was only one register called A in 8-bit code. And then they went to 16-bit, and that was, I think, AX. And then they went to 32-bit, and that was EAX for extended A extended. So anyway, it's all kind of stupid. But anyway, that moves into the ECX register, the number 42, which is in hexadecimal, which is why it's 04x. So it's not 4 times 10 plus 2, it's 4 times 16 plus 2. So there are a few little things there to give you a headache, but you get used to it. Now the move command is got a hexadecimal code, which is B9. B9 stands for move ECX. So this is the way that looks in binary. B9 42000. There are several reasons why this gives people a headache. The first thing is the move and the ECX are all in this B9, so that's annoying, but you normally don't care about that. The other thing is the number 42 is written in this strange way. It's 32 bits long, even though most of it is 0, and it's out of order. The logical way to write it would be 0000000042, but it's backwards. This is called little endian. The ones are here. This is the 256s, this is the 65,000, this is the 16 millions. Very annoying. That's the way it's done, little endian. I don't know why, where the least significant digits come first instead of the most significant digits coming first, the way we write normal numbers. So there are several things there that seem to be just cruel to give you a headache, but that's the way it is. So big endian would be the logical way to do it, where 64 would look like that, but the processes we are using are all little endian for some ungodly reason. I think it is probably because the actual flipping of bits inside the processor to do the math is faster this way. Anyway, that's the way it is. However, network data is all big endian. When you go to an address like 192.168.1.101, the 192 really has to be first. So network data has to be stored in the opposite way as integer data that's going to be used for math. So you spend a lot of time flipping it one way or the other and getting it wrong and swearing until you get over being mad about it. So that's 127.0.0.1 looks like that. And it's sent over the network that way. But if you stored it as a number, it would be stored with the bytes in the other direction. So we're going to do a lot of flipping bytes to the other order as we move from place to place in here. So you can have fixed values like 42. You can have registers, EAX, EBX, and ECX, and there's a bunch of other registers. And you can have a memory address, which you denote with brackets. So this means take the value EAX, call that an address, and go fetch the RAM from that address. That's called indirect addressing, or a pointer. So here's the registers that you have. EA, B, C, and D are the general all-purpose registers. Then you have the ones that are probably the most important for us, the ESP and EBP. ESP is the top of the stack and EBP is the bottom of the stack. Those point to that is the region of stack that is being used by the current process. And the whole thing we are going to do is trick the computer into writing outside the allowed region of the stack, and then we can take it over. That's the main thing we're going to do. And of course, the EIP is our real goal. The EIP is the extended instruction pointer. This is the address of the next instruction to execute. And if we can gain control of the EIP, we can gain control of the machine because we can point it to a different instruction than the programmer expected it to go to. And if we're smart, that gives us control of the machine. So we really want the EIP, but we usually get there by using ESP and EBP to exploit the stack. All right, so general registers are there. Segment registers keep track of memory segments, not really that important to us. And there's status flags, which are used to decide if something is above 0 or below 0. And again, we don't really care about that too much around here. The instruction pointer is our real target. We want to gain control of the instruction pointer, and then we can tell it to execute an instruction that the developer didn't expect, and that's how we're going to get remote control of the machine. So in 32-bit code, all the registers are 32 bits. And so you can also refer to parts of the register like A low and A high and AX. If you really want to, for backward compatibility, you can refer to 8-bit or 16 bits at a time, but you don't do that very often. The only reason we're going to do that when we make shellcode is to get rid of all those zeros. It turns out zeros are really a problem. Null bytes terminate strings and usually break your exploit. So remember this instruction we had back here, that's the instruction that puts 42 in EAX. It's got a whole bunch of bytes of 0. Now it'll run this way, but you often cannot feed that into a system. If it's expecting text like a URL or a password, you can't have zeros in it. So that's why we use this old-fashioned legacy stuff where you refer to just 8 bits at a time, so we don't have all those zeros in there. Anyway, we'll play with that later. All right, and so here's EAX is the whole 32 bits. AX is the right 16 bits, and A high and A low are the two 8-bit segments of that. So you can refer to just 8 bits at a time or 16 bits at a time if you really want to. Normally, you'd only do that if you're trying to run like games from the days of MS-DOS or something, but it's useful for us in writing shellcode to get rid of the null bytes. All right, so general registers, A, B, C, and D can hold any kind of data, and they hold various temporary data as you go. Multiplication and division, use them in a special way because you have to store bigger numbers. But we don't really do multiplication and division very much. The only people that really want to do that are people making like 3D graphics rendering engines for games and stuff. And we're not going into that complicated stuff. We're just trying to take over the machine. So there's a flag register showing bits like whether the last calculation resulted in 0 or not, and 0 carry, sign, and trap. And none of those are too crucial for us. You can be aware of them, but we're not going to play with that very much. Serious assembly language programmers have to get very good at understanding all these and making really tight code. But the shell code we're going to use is pretty simple stuff. The EIP is the main thing, where it controls the address and the next instruction. If you gain control of the EIP, you can cause the code that's there to execute out of order. You don't get the ability to directly add new code, but you do get the ability to execute the instructions that are there out of order, and that turns out to be extremely powerful, as we're going to see. All right, so I got some cahoots about that. And this is 1B. All right. And I'll run it here. All right, I'll wait a few more seconds. Still a few people coming in. All right, I guess that's it. Okay. So what's the type of assembly language most malware uses? Okay, that's what your book says. More and more of it's 64-bit. I'm not sure this is still true, but I haven't seen a study in the last few years. There will certainly come a time when people quit writing 32-bit malware, but I think it's still mostly 32-bit. Anyway, we're going to start with 32-bit and move on to 64-bit. We're going to cover both quite extensively this semester, and we're going to do ARM32 and ARM64, which I'm very pleased with, because all those are increasingly important. All right. What's move, and XOR? What are those things? Those are called mnemonics. You could think of them as verbs. That's what it does. All right. There's loopback address. What kind of notation is that? A big endian. The big part comes first, the way we normally write numbers. All right, instruction places data in EAX. What kind of operand is EAX? That's a register. Registers are little memory locations on the processor that are not in the RAM. They do not have an address. They're stored on the processor, and there's not very many registers, so you're constantly shuttling data in and out of them and storing it in RAM when you're done using it to clear the register to reuse it again. You instruct data in bracket EAX. What is bracket EAX? That's a memory address. EAX is an address. That's now RAM. That points to somewhere in RAM. That's what the bracket means. Okay. So, mile, all right? And poet. And Chris, the two-time winner. Good. All right. So, good. There's one more section of these, and then we'll take a break, and I'll demonstrate the first project or two, because you should be able to start doing your hands-on stuff. All right. So we'll talk about a few simple instructions. Move is the most common instruction. By the way, move is all you need. Move has been proven to be NP complete. You can write an entire program with nothing but move, but it is completely insane, and you'd only do that to hide your code. Anyway, so for some ungodly reason, the most common format used for Windows code is, I think this is the AT&T format. There's one called AT&T, one called Intel, and the most common one is the one that has source on the right and destination on the left, just to give you another headache. So, yeah, here we are. Intel, the only way I can do it, I'm a total wimp, the only way I can do it is I look for a number. You can't write to a number, so that's got to be the source. So 48 goes here, so this sub at the bottom on the left is move is sub destination source. And in the AT&T format, it's the other way, source destination, which would seem more logical. And they're both used, just to make sure that all of us are good and confused all the time. Anyway, all right, so indirect addressing is brackets. So bracket around EBX means the memory location pointed to by EBX. And so here's some examples. Move EBX into EAX, because there's source on the right, destination on the left. Here's put 42 in EAX. Here's put whatever's in that location in RAM, 4037C4, put that in EAX. Here's take EBX, interpret it as an address, get whatever's in the memory of that address and put it in EAX. And here's something you'll see a lot in real assembly code. You have EBX plus a stack index times 4 as an address, and you go there. This is what happens when you copy a string. Each move operation moves 32 bits, but strings store data 4 bytes at a time. So you want to jump forward by 4. Because of legacy, RAM is addressed by bytes, but it's used 32 bits at a time, not 8 bits at a time anymore. So you jump ahead by 4s if you want to copy a block of memory. And if you're using 64-bit code, you jump ahead by 8s. So this is something you'll frequently see. So there's this weird thing called load effective address, which seems kind of unnecessary, but that's what it is. This will take EBX plus 8, interpret it as an address, and then put the address in AX. So this does not fetch any data from RAM. It adds 8 to the number of EBX and puts it in EAX. You could do it with 2 or 3 instructions in a simpler way, but that's how it's done. Anyway, so here's some examples. If you have EAX and EBX, as shown on the left, EAX is 0 and EBX points to this B30040, then bracket EBX would point here to this location in memory, B0040, and that might have a 0. And here's that number plus 4, that number plus 8, that number plus 12. We'll have more and more data. And we'll play with this a lot more, and you'll get a lot of practice reading this sort of thing and learning to understand it. So you got all the stuff you need for arithmetic, subtract and add and increment to add 1 and decrement to subtract 1 and multiply and divide. Of course, everything you need is there. And you got NOP. This seems useless, like a 0 seems useless. It turns out to be really important. A NOP is an instruction that does nothing. The reason NOP exists is because, remember, the original instruction we did was a move 42 into EAX, and that was a 5-byte instruction. It had an A9, which was the move to EBX, or EAX, and then it had a 32-bit number to move. So total amount of data was 5 bytes. So some instructions are 1 byte, some are 5 bytes, some are 6 or 7, and some instructions have to start on a 4-byte boundary. You can't just put them at address number 1. You got to put them at 0 or 4. So sometimes you have to pad and fill a few bytes. That's what NOP is for. NOP does nothing, and you can fill a few bytes to hit a boundary. But attackers use NOP to make a NOP sled. We're going to use NOP sleds a lot. A NOP sled means you can make a mistake in your attack and it will still work. So if you put an attack code and then you try to run that attack code, you have to find the address where it is. You have to get it right. If you're off by even 1 byte, it won't run. But if you put 1,000 bytes of NOP before it, you can hit anywhere in the 1,000-byte sled and it will do NOP, 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 and then run your egg. So it turns out in practice to be extremely handy to use a bunch of NOPs in a row in attack code, but no normal code created by a compiler would ever look like that. So this is actually a useful way to detect attacks with intrusion detection systems and so on. But we're going to use it all the time. NOP sleds will save you from a ton of suffering because it turns out that the way you develop an exploit is in a debugger, and the debuggers are not very accurate. And the addresses in the debugger tend to be off by maybe 30, 40, 50, or even 100 bytes from the address in the real system. So you get your exploit working, and when you run it on a real system, it doesn't work. And if you just use a NOP sled that's a few hundred long, you can avoid suffering as much with this problem. So the stack, you got the extended base pointer, which is the bottom of the current stack frame, and the ESP is the top of the current stack frame. You use push to put data on the stack, which makes it the stack frame bigger, and you use pop to take data off the stack, which makes the stack frame smaller. And all the call to call a subroutine, and leave, which does essentially the same thing, or leave, which returns, and enter, which goes in, and return, which comes back. These involve stack operations. When you call a subroutine, it has to make a new stack frame to store the local variables. And when you return, it has to return that data to the stack for reuse and restore the previous stack frame to resume execution of the calling routine. So you'll have a function call. You'll have a program, and then it decides to print something, so it calls printf. So it has to stop what it's doing, save the current state, and go into printf and do something there, the system routine, and then come back. So there is a prologue at the start of the routine, which prepares the stack frame, and there's an epilogue, which restores the stack frame, making it available for reuse, and presumably restores the original environment to resume execution of the calling function. So you have a stack frame, for example, your Windows is running. So Windows is down here. Then you double click on something like Microsoft Word. So it launches Microsoft Word. Then you click on open a file. So it calls an open routine. Then you enter a file name and it calls some kind of string processing routine. And this is how it goes. And typically when you're running a program, you're 20 or 30 layers deep in a dream within a dream and hopping back and forth. And as long as nothing goes wrong, everything is fine. But if at any point somebody makes a mistake and puts data where it shouldn't be, then it's like a stick in the spokes and something bad will happen. Usually just a crash, but if you're very deft, you take over the machine. So the stack frame is what's being used by one routine, and it's got variables here. You got like counting string variables, and then you have all your local variables. Then you have the old data here, the old base pointer and return address, and then when you return, you're going to use those to resume execution in the calling routine. And so if we are able to write past the end of a string, we can change that return address. And now when it thinks it's returning home, it's in fact going somewhere else under our control. Test and compare are assembly language instructions that compare two things to see if they're equal or not. And then you can follow it by a branch on 0 or a branch greater than 0 or a branch less than 0. This is how you implement an if. So there's jump 0, jump not 0, and there are many other options. And so when you enter C, every C program looks like this. It has a main routine, which is where it starts, and that can have this argc and argv, which is the count of arguments and the number of arguments that are coming in. And so if you do cp, copy foo to bar, cp was written in C, all the Unix commands are written in C. That's what C is designed for, so you can write Unix. And so this will copy the file foo into the file bar. This has an argument counter 3. The first CP is the name of the program itself is the first one, and first argument is foo, and the second argument is bar. One of the very, very annoying things about computer programming is that everybody starts counting at 0. So you have 3 things, you count them 0, 1, 2. This might sound like a small problem. It is in fact a huge problem. And there are a ton of serious security vulnerabilities that come from being off by 1. Because no matter how many years you've been doing this, you forget. And you end up doing something 11 times or 9 times when you intended to do it 10 times because starting at 0 is just very rude. There's a long dead language when I started called BASIC where you would start at 1, and boy, it was a lot easier back then. But that ship has sailed, and for some ungodly reason, we're living in the world where the way you count to 10 is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I don't know why they do that to us when we all went through kindergarten and learned a different way to count to 10, which seemed a whole lot more sensible, but they didn't ask me. Anyway, so now you learn how to spot C code in assembly. So here's C code. I define a number, and then I do number plus plus to add one to the number. So in assembler, you define a word variable called number, and here you can do it this way. Move number into EAX, increment EAX, and put EAX back in number. Now, why would you do 3 steps? Because the assembly does not have a command to increment in RAM. You can only increment a register. So you have to move it into the register, increment the register, and put it back in RAM. It often takes several assembly language commands to do one line of C. That's, of course, why people would much rather write C or Python or something, where one command does something a human can understand instead of having to do little tiny commands to add up to it. So here's an if. You have a number, if number less than 0, do something. So here we define a number, we move that number in EAX, you do an OR of EAX or EAX, and the result will be 0 if EAX is 0, and it will be non-zero if it's non-zero. So now if it's greater than or equal to, I jump somewhere, otherwise I do the next code. That's what an if looks like. And there are many different ways to do it, but that's one way an if might be compiled. Here's an array. I define an array of 4 things, and then I set the second element to 9. So I define an array up here with 4 zeros. Those are 32-bit values. Then I put a 2 in EBX, and then I put the 9 in array sub EBX. So I made it start an array and add 2 bytes to it, and then put it there. That's one way to do it. One thing that troubles me a little bit is I'm not sure those are byte variables or are they word variables. They're 16 or 32 bits big. So I might prefer to see EBX times 4 there. And that's the kind of thing you'd have to consider carefully when translating to assembler. So here's a triangle. This is going to define, to calculate area times width. And the only point I want to say is you define width times height over 2 here. And in this case, they actually use iMultiplying to do the multiplication. Now, when I started in the world of 8-bit assemblers on 6502, there was no multiply command. All you had was add and subtract, and you had to write your own multiplying in assembler if you wanted to do stuff in assembler, which was not too popular, but I got into it. Anyway, now you lazy guys get to use a multiply command. So I hope you're grateful. Anyway, all right. But we're not going to do anything complicated like multiplication or division. We just want to take over the machine. And that doesn't usually require any such sophisticated mathematics. So we're at our last cahoots. I tried to implement RSA encryption in like 1981. We had an 8-bit processor, and I wanted to do 100-digit integer mathematics, and I did not succeed. If I had, I would have been Phil Zimmerman, and he spent the next 15 years being prosecuted by the NSA and everybody. The world of hurt came down on him. I was going to be that guy, but I wasn't smart enough to write the code. I was spared all that suffering by being kind of dumb, so there's a lesson there. Anyway. He had a 16-bit machine. He managed to do it. I thought, just like everybody in information security, I thought, yeah, let's hide everything from the government. That'll be swell. So I wanted to write that encryption stuff and make it go. Unbreakable encryption, this is awesome. And he did it. And I failed. Then a ton of bricks landed on him. Anyway. All right, I'll give it another few seconds. All right. So what's the mnemonic to multiplying 2 numbers? I multiply, by the way, that's integer multiply. There are, in fact, another bunch of floating point registers and floating point math commands, which I haven't even talked about, but they're there for 3D rotation in games. They exist in modern processors, but I've only used them to like hide things. Anyway, all right. What mnemonic compares 2 numbers? Test does it. CMP also does it. They're almost the same. I think there is some weird condition in which they're all different by 1 bit or something, but for all practical purposes, they do the same thing. Which mnemonic enters a function? Call. You call a function like printf or something. All right. What mnemonic serves a special purpose for buffer overflows? Not. We have a special use for a long string of nots which nobody else would actually want to use. All right. What term describes the instructions at the start of a function? That's the prologue. All right. And which mnemonic shrinks the stack? Pop. Take something off the stack, and therefore the stack is now smaller. Okay, good. Let's see what we got. Amparo, okay. Ah, Chris is a winner. And Cheesecake is doing pretty well too. Okay, so you guys have extra credit, but you won't get any points unless I can figure out who you are. Some of this might be a real name, but most of it doesn't look very real to me. Anyway, let's take a 10-minute break, and then I'm going to demonstrate the first couple of projects. So I'm going to stop this recording and start another. 2:19, we'll pick up at 2:30. I'll demonstrate the first project. I'm going to leave the share going. So I'm just going to stop. I don't know if it's going to be a second recording or a continuation of the first one. Doesn't really matter. All right. So as an alert student pointed out, I've got the wrong instructions for the projects here. So it's a good idea to demonstrate something and make sure I've made it clear, because you should all start doing hands-on right away. That's why we're here. So the first thing you have to do is make a Linux server. Now, if you have a Kali virtual machine or a Mac or something, you can use it for the first few projects, but in the long run, I highly recommend getting a cloud machine. Get used to the cloud. I use the Google Cloud because it's free. The other one, it would be far more valuable to use the Amazon cloud. That would be a better skill to put on your resume, or the Microsoft cloud, but they don't give much free stuff. They're bureaucratic and annoying. Google is number 3, and they're having real hard time getting traction. So they're giving away a lot of free stuff, which is what I like. So you need a credit card, but they won't charge it, or a bank account, but they won't charge it. And you get an unlimited amount of free stuff. When you sign up, you get $300 of free cloud service. And when you've used it up, you just make another Gmail account and reuse the same credit card again and get another $300. I've done it about 15 times. They don't seem to care because they can't make any traction. Azure got the DoD contract. Amazon keeps growing. They're constantly throwing more chum in the water to try to get more business, and it's not working. So at some point, they'll quit doing it, and I'll be hosed. I'll have to actually admit that you have to have like $5 to buy some cloud servers to take my class. But for the moment, Americans can still do it for free. Now, I taught this in China, and they, of course, can't use Google anything. So when I do this in China, I'm going to say you actually have to rent some cloud services from Vulture, which is available in China. They're a super cheap cloud service. Anyway, so you make a Google Cloud server, and it's really very easy. You take a Google account, and you end up go to Google Cloud Platform, and you can create cloud machines, which is what I highly recommend. You can use local virtual machines in VMware VirtualBox, which is what I used to do. But those things are very, very annoying these days, and everybody's using the cloud. So it's far more valuable to learn how to use the cloud than to learn how to use VirtualBox or something. So I got a Debian machine and an Ubuntu machine, which is what, and so in this class, we're just going to use this Debian machine. All you do is click the SSH, and it gives you a shell right there, a command shell into your machine. This is a headless Debian server with no GUI, which is fine for what we're doing. It just gives me a command line interface to control a machine in the cloud. And the reason why it's better than running a local virtual machine is it's always the same for everybody. You don't need to have any special hardware. And the other thing is it has a public IP address. So you can attack real servers and have them phone home to you. You don't have to go through NAT to get to you. So it's actually very useful. And all real pen testers use these things all the time to pen test real servers. The other thing, of course, is it's a throwaway machine. So if you get on blacklists and banned and everything, it doesn't hurt you. You haven't matched your real address, and it doesn't really point to you, so nobody can tell who you are very easily. So, you know, this is the boss way to do hacking, is on these cloud machines. So once you got a cloud machine, then I got a project. Just in case you don't know any Linux, you should practice a little bit of Linux. So if you do, you make this stuff fit on the screen more or less. So you should learn a little bit of bash so you can do attacks like this. So if I do ls, it's going to show me the files in my current directory. The only thing I have is a folder called 127. ls-l will show me the long form, which shows that this is a directory because directories start with D. If I make a file, if I can use echo, for example, to print something out like hi, and it just puts hi on the screen. But I can also use a greater than sign to put that in a file called foo. And now when I do ls-l, I've got a directory and a file. A directory named 127 and a file named foo. It's a file because it starts with a minus sign. And these are the permissions. This is the owner. The owner of this is CNIT 54.3. This is the group that person is in. And here is the permissions: read, write, and execute. So the owner can read and write, but not execute it because this file is not a program. People in the same group can read it, but they can't write to it or execute it. And others can read it, but they can't write or execute. Those are the Linux permissions. And you'll get used to them. Anyway, there's a few simple things here where you learn to do a few simple commands, and then you can start hacking things. So once you've done this, you'll end up with some screenshots to take. Like here, 103, you have an answer to this command and you just email it. So here are the instructions for turning in projects. Let's go back to the one where you made your cloud server. That's probably, okay. So when you're done, you install this thing called HWinfo and run it, which tells you the hardware you're using, and you're using Google virtual hardware. So it's going to have a characteristic name for the model. So this green box is the flag. You have to get a screenshot containing what I've hidden out of the green box. Take a screen image and email it to this address, CNIT 127 SAM. That's how you turn in your homework. And I'm going to put this at the top of the projects page so you got it. That's how you turn in your instructions. When I'm teaching it like B-sides and DEF CON and stuff, there's a scoring engine where you just type in the flag and get the points. But I don't use that on campus because I want to see screen images, because there's some people that are cheating and stuff, and this way I have some control over it. And at conferences, that's not as much of an issue. Anyway, so once you've got a server and you've learned the basics of Linux, you can start hacking things. The simplest vulnerability that the people have is command injection, and it goes like this. If you have a router, your router has a page in the administration page that says test the network. And the test network pages are typically very simple, and they work like this. You type in an IP address or a URL like google.com, and here I'm using 127.0.0.1 for other reasons that aren't important. But now it's going to ping. I tell it to send pings, and here's what I get. I get ping, 64 bytes from and 64 bytes from. Now, if you haven't used Linux, you may not recognize, but that is what it looks like when you do a ping in Linux. If I ping google.com, that's what I see, 64 bytes from and 64 bytes from. So this tells you this program was written in PHP, but this sloppy programmer did not figure out how to do a ping from inside PHP, that programmer being me. Very many times people do this. It's too much bother to actually do the job in the language. So you just write a line of code and pass it on to another language. So what it did was take the address from the user and just add it to the word ping and then execute it in the shell. But what that means is I could put something other than the address there. So what I did right now is ping -C2 127.0.0.1. And that does 2 pings and then stops. But in Linux, you can put multiple commands on a line separated by semicolon. So I could do an ls, and I could do, say, who am I, to see what my identity is, or I could do ls semicolon, who am I. And it will do the ls and then do the who am I. You can have as many commands as you want separated by semicolons. So I can do a command injection here. I can put a semicolon ls after that, and it will do the ping and then do an ls. So these are the files on my server. This is command injection. The intention of the developer was to just let you do one thing, a ping, but because they were a sloppy developer and did not think about you putting a semicolon here or restricting this to only a few characters or something, you can in fact add more data, so you can do extra commands. You can now execute commands on my server. You can't do everything though, because if you do who am I, you'll find out that you are www.data, which is the Apache user, and that is not root. So you don't have root privileges on my server with this attack, but you do have the ability to execute arbitrary code on my server up to a certain limit. And in particular, you can now figure out how to print out the contents of a flag and then search through the directory system and find other flags. And there's a series of flags to find up here. So you can find various flags by executing more and more commands there, and you'll find it's a good thing to practice exploiting a command injection vulnerability. And there are other versions of the same thing. This is a fairly common one, but extremely simple. Now, here's one that really affected a large portion of the web in 2014. All the websites that use images, like people with social media accounts and profile pictures and so on, they pretty much all use the ImageMagick library. It is the standard library. And here's what it does. Let me get an image to start from. Like if I go to CCSF, there's an image. I can't get that one, or I'm going to take a, fine, I'll take a picture of this city. Okay. So now I got an image. There it is. Okay, I'm going to call that ccsf.ping. So it's just an image, and there it is. Okay, so now, if I go here, I just copied this code from some generic forum code. So you choose a file, desktop ccsf.ping, open. Now you upload the image. Now my page, I had it print out the commands it uses. So it made a thumbnail version of the image that's a certain size. And when you click it, you see the full size image, which is bigger. That's what this does, just like everybody's profile page. And this is the ImageMagick command to do that. This will convert to a thumbnail 300 by 300, the file that was just uploaded, and put it in this file ping.ping. That's what it does. So that's ImageMagick working as intended. It turns out ImageMagick has a security flaw, and it goes like this. If you put this text in a text file and save it and make it look like an image. So I'm just going to make a new file. I'm going to put in that text, and I'm going to save it. Save on my desktop as exploit.jpg. So I'm making the file extension make it look like a JPEG image, but it's not. Now, what's going on here is the ImageMagick library has some advanced features. Instead of just putting up an image, you can actually put an image on a background color. And for some ungodly reason, the background color doesn't have to be fixed. You can fetch the color from the web and have that color dynamically change. So it can fill with a color, and it can get the color from a URL from this example.com. The problem is they implemented it the same way I did the ping. They didn't actually figure out how to write this process in PHP. They just used curl to fetch the color. And after curl, they put in the URL that came from the user. So if you put in the correct punctuation marks, which are a little different than a semicolon, you can execute other commands. So this is going to try to fetch a color from this URL, which will fail, but I don't care. And then it's going to echo hello, and then it's going to execute the command date. Now we've already seen what these commands do, at least one of them. Let's go back here. So here's my shell. If you do echo hello, it just prints hello. If you do date, it just prints the date. Not very exciting, but the point is this is a proof of concept. It proves that I'm able to put commands in what should have been an image. So if I upload that fake image file, here, choose file, and exploit.jpg, and upload image, it does hello, and then the date. So it tried to convert the thumbnail, but because they wrote their code the same sloppy way I wrote mine, this is the problem. And we're going to see, this is the root of almost all command injection vulnerabilities, is you write code in one language, which is then interpreted in another language. And in a web development class, we're going to do this all semester long. This is how you take over web servers. Typical web servers have like 4 or 5 engines, a database server, a PHP server. They're trading data back and forth. And when it goes from one system to the next, it gets confused. That's how you take over web servers. Anyway, so here we have the ability to execute arbitrary code. So you just have to figure out how to add other codes here. And you see here we got our old friend, the semicolon. So without fouling up the punctuation, you can now put commands here and execute them on my server. So once again, I have some challenges. You can find some things here. There's a flag. There's various flags up here to find, flag 5 and flag 6. Now here's another one that is real, and this one is really big. I was just reading again about, this is what is in fact used to hack that voting machine. Remember in the news, right at the start, they said they've had an image from Georgia. Real voting systems were hacked by somebody, and they used this attack. They were using an old version of Drupal. So this was called Drupal-geddon. Drupal is a content management system. It's like the number 3 or 4 most popular content management system. The number 1 is WordPress. It's a way to make a dynamic page that can show blogs and other things, and you can put shopping sites on it and everything. So I put up a Drupal server here, and I made it an old vulnerable version, and there it is. Now, when you try to connect to it the first time, it's going to make you put in a name and password, because otherwise it will get hacked and be down every time I need it. Because the Drupal-geddon is so popular, there are bots attacking the whole internet with Drupal-geddon. So if you put up a vulnerable server, I've had students do it in class, and 10 minutes later, someone were already hacked. So it's ridiculous. So if you connect to my server, it'll ask for a name and password to try to stop the automated attacks. And you get in with student 1, and the password is also student 1. It's not very strong, but it stops the automated attacks from hitting my server, so it actually stays up for a whole semester. The only people hacking it is you. And that happens enough. So this is my Drupal server, which doesn't do much of anything except run Drupal in an old vulnerable version. But there's a known Drupal-geddon attack, and that's what we're going to use. And the Drupal-geddon attack is here. It's written, by the way, in the old version of Python, which still runs, although it's not going to get updates anymore. Python was a lot of fun, but they made it annoying with Python 3. But anyway, however, we're going to do template injection later, which is the joy of Python 3. Python 3 is much more complicated, but it has a whole bunch of new exciting vulnerabilities because of that. So it makes me want to forgive it for being annoying. So this is the proof of concept exploit that somebody wrote. And what this does is it puts a smiley face in a file called yourname.txt. And then it says, check that file. So it defaces the server by adding another page to it, showing that I can execute code. So I'm going to put that in a file. I'm going to use my cloud server. You could use any Linux box. Let me go to 127. And I'm going to, Nano is the editor I like to use, command line on editor. I'm going to call this hack Drupal, hackdrew.py. Okay, first I'm going to start with just this thing the way it is, but some other student has already made your name, so I'm going to change the name of the file to something else. It looks like it's January 18. I'm going to call it Jan 18. Just something that's not already there. So Jan 18. And down here, Jan 18. Okay. Okay, now, to make sure that I'm not cheating, I'm going to go to my page, which is here. Okay. And this is Drupal. And if I go to /jan18.txt, that page does not exist. That's what I want. Currently, there is no page with that name. This exploit, if it works, is going to make that page. Python hack Drew. Okay, it went, and now it says check that file. So if I reload that file, now it's there and it has a smiley face in it. So I'm able to execute the command and write this data into a file on my server. And therefore, by modifying this code, I can do anything up to the privileges of that account. So if I do cat of that file, hack. Okay, so again, you got this. What happened is there's something in the email part of Drupal, like signing up for a mailing list, that had another place where they used code from the user and put it in a command line. So you can see down here is executable code. Echo this to P Jan 8. They had to use T because you cannot put in a greater than sign. It will break the syntax. So you had to use somewhat indirect things. But again, here is, you could let it do this and then put like, let's try this. Let's put a semicolon ls there. I just want to prove that it's working. So if I want to execute arbitrary commands on the server, I think I can just put them here. Semicolon, who am I? Semicolon date, for example. Let's see if that works. Because I have the ability to execute commands, but the syntax is picky. If I mess up the punctuation, it will fail. So let's see what this does. Oh, you know, I won't be able to see the result. So what I got to do something smarter than that. I'm going to have to, instead of echoing this, I'm going to do like, who am I? Let's do that. There, who am I? And that'll go into this file. And now I'm going to call it Jan18A. There, now this might work. So now instead of putting a smiley face in, it's going to put in, who am I? Let's see if that works. And this is Jan18A, so I got to change it to Jan18A everywhere. The last one is just a message, so I don't really need to change it, but I'm going to do it just for completeness. Let's try that. Now I run my hack. That's rude. I probably fouled it up. Let's see if it worked anyway, because often it's lying. Anyway, that's why this one's in the extra credit. This one gets a little harder. And let's see if the A worked. Yeah, it didn't work. All right, so I probably broke something. Anyway, that's the point. You have the ability to inject commands, but it gets a little trickier. And that's what I wanted you to see. These are all very simple vulnerabilities, but these really have affected a lot of people, and it gets you a start. Next week, we're going to do SQL injection, which is another version of the same thing, very important, but it's a little more confusing because SQL is a little confusing language compared to Bash. But it is a very similar thing. And then after a couple more classes, we'll get down to the binary exploits where you inject assembly code. But we're starting by injecting a high-level language that's probably easier and more familiar, like Bash or SQL. And later on, we're just going to inject raw hexadecimal that runs as compiled code. So are there any questions? So you guys should start turning stuff in. Nothing's late for a while. You got time, but I highly recommend not falling behind. So I recommend do the first couple quizzes online, read the first couple chapters, and start doing projects. So I recommend them by this date. The asterisk means I'm not going to punish you until after the ad period's over. But I recommend doing them at that rate. But nothing's really going to be counted late until February 1, I think. I might even make that later. I'm going to check the date. I'm going to make it after the ad period so people that add aren't already late on things. Anyway, any questions about anything? Yeah. Oh, yes. Turn them in early. That's great. And you can do extra credit. Like a lot of them have extra credit portions. In fact, I think this Drupal thing is extra credit because as you see, it's a little bit hard. Like this one here, you got parts that are not extra credit, and then you got the extra credit. And the extra credit part, you know, that's what I recommend. If you do enough extra credit, you don't have to take the final. It makes up for bad quizzes and everything. And you can even do things that are not in my list of projects. Go do something exciting. Give a talk to the class. Build a gadget, hack something. Just don't break the law. But you know, there's tons of things to do every day in the news. There's exciting stuff to set up and go. Somebody can set up some of these new Microsoft phones and get them going. I'd love to do that. They just dumped a proof of concept for one of these Microsoft phones. I would like to make a project out of that. Go ahead and do it. If you can get it working, I want to see it. Caitlin came and got the Red Star OS, which is North Korea's operating system that spies on you. And she got it running and played with that. And that's pretty awesome. There's so many fun things to do. Yeah. And it was even, I used it at DEF CON CTF one. And of course, it's horrible. It's like an old, out-of-date version of Ubuntu with a bunch of spyware on it. It's kind of hilarious, but it's fun to play with. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to stop the share online, and I'll be back next week. I'm going to go down to Science 37 and see what's happening. And if it's too busy down there, we might come up to 214. I'll stick around in case anybody wants to work on projects today. But if you don't, you can just do them from home. And you can do them later. Let's see if there are any more chat messages I should answer. Should that be a single, not double quote? Probably. That's probably what I did wrong. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, AWS gives 50 free hours. Yeah, but only once and never again. So you could do stuff on AWS, but I can't assign it and do it semester after semester, whereas Google keeps giving me more and more and more free forever. There is something called an AWS Academy, and I'm trying to become one, but they're like bureaucratic and they don't like our email server, and it's it's hard to get. Anyway, all right, I'm going to turn this off. I'll see you folks next week, if not sooner. Yeah, that's what I'm here for.